With one eye on nature and the other eye on TV, the Canadian summer of '92 promised fast food from the Olympics and added fibre from the constitutional drama. Out here, all was calm until, like a gust of wind out of nowhere, we heard the news.
And depending on who you believe, it's either a risky move for Canada or the greatest deal on earth. Keith Bogue reports.
The pro and anti-free traders were in their usual boxes this morning, already engaged in the struggle to shape public opinion on NAFTA. Two papers in particular have deliberately identified themselves on opposing sides of the issue. The anti-free trade Toronto Star headline read, "New trade deal called job plan for Mexico." Inside, the paper called for an election. Its opinion page featured an article by one of the leading critics of free trade, Maud Barlow, who said NAFTA will permit and even encourage investment to flow south, taking advantage of the environmental pollution havens and desperate workforce of North America's third world. On the other hand, one of the biggest supporters of free trade, the Globe and Mail, said the public is already resigned to freer trade, and on its opinion page it featured free trade supporter John Crispo, who described NAFTA as essential. Forget the critics, read the headline, "Free trade works."
Canadians have every right to be optimistic.
Trade Minister Michael Wilson worked almost non-stop, day and night, to negotiate the NAFTA, but he's not taking a break yet, not while the deal still needs selling.
And it will put money in people's pockets, so it isn't just a trade deal, it's a prosperity deal as well.
In the U.S. today, NAFTA was a page-one story just about everywhere. And there, too, the politicians wasted no time pushing the deal.
For the first time in history, the Mexican market will be open to sales of U.S. autos and auto parts and trucks.
And the country's leading environmental official has already been called to the defense of NAFTA.
This is the most environmentally sensitive, the greenest trade agreement ever negotiated anywhere.
One of the greener points of the NAFTA agreement for Canada is that Canadian pulp and paper exports will increase simply because Mexico has few trees. According to editorial writers, this is a new and improved moral trade agreement that all Canadians can support. Such media says that trade for Mexico will allow the Mexican underclass to substantially improve their standard of living. But trade itself has little to do with the redistribution of wealth. Promises of trickle-down prosperity are at best a mere drop in the bucket. Though it's being promoted as a new imperative, globalization of trade and its accompanying social destruction has a long and repetitive history.
In 1970, the Hudson's Bay Company was celebrating its 300th anniversary. The attending company's directors presented Queen Elizabeth II with 2 beavers and 2 elk's heads. Martin DeFalco and Willie Dunn's 1972 NFB film, The Other Side of the Ledger, allowed Indian and Métis participants to evaluate the Bay's trading practices. The film was narrated by George Manuel, then president of the National Indian Brotherhood.
In 1670, Charles II granted the Company of Adventurers trading into Hudson's Bay, otherwise known as the Hudson's Bay Company. This charter giving the company an absolute trade monopoly over 1 million square miles of land in what is now Canada. At this time in history, this vast area called Rupert's Land was exclusively occupied by the Indian and the Eskimo.
The land that was taken by the Hudson Bay Company was given to the provinces and then given to the Crown, you know. It's sort of a funny kind of a deal, land deal, you know, like selling land that doesn't belong to you.
In 1970, the Hudson's Bay Company had annual sales of $500 million from its chain of urban department stores and was still operating some 100 trading posts in the north. At that time, Treaty Indians were receiving annual symbolic government land compensation of $5 per person, while 1/3 of their population was living on welfare. The infant mortality rate was twice the national average, and life expectancy was 36 years.
My brothers and sisters get their welfare checks through the mail, and so my brothers and sisters tell me, and I have no reason to disbelieve what they're saying, that the Hudson Bay manager often simply gets them to sign their welfare check right there at the post office, and they're never allowed to take it out, and then simply will shop for the remaining of their goods at high prices in the store. They're not even allowed to go and shop at the co-op store.
I will deny that completely and totally. If we have a man that will do that, he will not be in our organization tomorrow.
I had the experience recently for the first time of visiting a remote reserve, and one in which the Hudson Bay was the only company. But the fact was very visible that the Indians were poverty-stricken, they were dependent, and their culture was very much threatened. That was a reality. That's where we are, and it isn't working.
We are purely and simply storekeepers in these areas. It is not our authority to do anything. It is the government's responsibility through the Department of Indian Affairs, the Department of Northern Affairs. This has nothing to do with the Hudson's Bay Company. We are storekeepers just the same as in the city of Winnipeg.
Though the past and present treatment of Aboriginal peoples worldwide undoubtedly offers the harshest example of abuse, capital is by intent and definition a mean master. Free trade has always been a means of protectionism for competing economic elites. In the 19th century, it was a new class of British industrialists who were demanding free trade as a way of gaining priority over the dominant agricultural landowners. Free trade was argued to gain access to cheap food so that industrial workers could survive on the lowest possible wages. Caught in this dispute, Canadian Tory loyalists were upset at losing their preferential colonial trade tariffs when the British Corn Laws were repealed in 1846. 3 years later, these Anglo-Canadian businessmen burnt the Parliament buildings in Montreal, a parliament that was still a British institution. This rebellious Tory group then encouraged the signing of an annexation manifesto demanding the voluntary surrender of British sovereignty of Canada to the Americans.
There are further historical parallels echoed in the new Canada-US-Mexico banquet. At the time of the Annexation Manifesto, General Zachary Taylor had just been elected U.S. President. Taylor was rewarded for his military victories over the Mexicans and the Spanish, resulting in the acquisition of Florida and Texas. President Taylor, occupied with the acquisition of New Mexico, the gold rush of California, and a military expedition to Cuba, declined the annexation offer. Canadian commercial capitalists thereafter would work harder to become part of the American empire.
Let's see what else is going on in the world. Oh, the free trade agreement signed this week. You hear about this? This promises to open up our borders with Mexico. Yeah, excuse me, I'm a little confused. This border wasn't exactly airtight to begin with, was it now? Does anybody understand this free trade agreement? This is supposed to help Americans get jobs. Huh? Yeah, tell me about it. I mean, you know what the free trade agreement means? You know what it means? All it means now is a worker in a GM plant in Mexico can now get a better deal on a Ford built in Canada by Canadians.
A recent PBS program, Bill Moyer's Living in America, adapted the findings of Philadelphia Inquirer investigative reporters Don Bartlett and Jim Steele. Bartlett and Steele's best-selling book, America, What Went Wrong, condenses 100,000 pages of documents and cross-country interviews. The authors give detailed accounts of plant closings and migrations, leveraged buyouts, and corporate tax evasion.
From 1985 to 1988, Carnival Cruise Lines, which promises evenings of dazzling entertainment, romantic dancing, and fast-paced casino action aboard ships with names such as Fantasy and Ecstasy, produced total profits of $500 million. The corporate income tax rate during those years ranged from 46% in 1985 to 34% in 1988. Meaning that Carnival paid about $200 million in federal taxes. Right? Wrong. Carnival paid not a cent in U.S. corporate income taxes on that $500 million in profits. Why? Isn't Carnival's office in Miami? And don't its ships leave from Miami, bound for the Caribbean with thousands of fun-loving Americans on board? Yup. but the company is incorporated in Panama. And the U.S. tax code exempts shipping companies incorporated in foreign countries from having to pay U.S. income taxes. No wonder Carnival's owner, Ted Arison, is smiling. No wonder Forbes magazine designated him last year as one of the richest people in the U.S., with wealth estimated at $2.3 billion.
But in a world of self-interest, isn't it a rational act to move write-offs and jobs to the cheapest locale?
You're taking basically $60,000 in U.S. tax money to eliminate a job that pays $28,000 in this country and create a job that pays $12,000 in Puerto Rico. It's not logical.
My one criticism of your report, which I think is excellent, of course, is that maybe you don't come down hard enough on the corporations themselves. I mean, after all, why is the government rule book biased toward the corporations? Because they have ways of lobbying. You talk about all those special interest provisions in the tax code and so on. I think that, one thing that has to be brought out here is that from the perspective of the kind of people we saw in those tapes, from the perspective of many of my neighbors in a sort of blue-collar suburb, the corporations are out of control. That we have a plutocracy now. This is what happens when you redistribute wealth so rapidly up. They can make the decisions. Where is our input? When they can decide to destroy a community by moving, and you don't even get a vote, not even polled on that, there is a sense that the country is being run by, or maybe I shouldn't say run, I should say plundered by a little group at the top.
During the last 20 years, we have lost confidence in publicly debating basic economic constructions. What free trade initiatives allow for is an opportunity to ask questions like, why must our economy be determined by private instead of public interests? Though we may not know the minute details of how our country's economy works, we all experience its effects. The current free flow of capital and globalization of trade has little to do with guaranteeing jobs, social programs, pensions, or our cultural needs. Regional alternatives would allow for a true global redistribution of wealth, access to education, job training, and technologies. One way or another, those who have consistently benefited from our capitalist democracies are going to have to lower their expectations.